Thank you. I am happy to present today some of the challenges that we have at the Census Bureau with data visualization. Next slide. The next slide. Okay, great. Let me start with a couple of milestones that have shaped how we approach data visualization at the Census Bureau. In the mid-1800s, technological advances allowed for mass production of high-quality images. And from the 1870 census, the Census Office produced the Statistical Atlas of the United States. It included maps that showed the distribution and density of people across the United States. But the atlas was more than maps. The book also included many other kinds of charts. And here you can see population pyramids which show age and sex distribution by characteristics and states. The layout allows readers to compare characteristics within each pyramid and across the pyramids. It's what we might call today an infographic. It has multiple dimensions of analysis, and with its small multiple format, it virtually provides comparisons, calculations, and relationships. Next slide, please. In 1890, with the invention of the Hollerith tabulating machine, the time to compile the census count was cut in half. The new invention changed more than the process of tallying the census count. It also changed the products from the census. It had the ability to do more and better tabulations than ever before. Now tables became the major dissemination method, and graphics and the statistical atlas fell to the side. Next slide, please. And then, after 100 years, more than 100 years of paper tables, the internet changed our dissemination strategy again. The new technology provided an opportunity to reach a larger and wide-ranging audience. And for the 2000 decennial census, we used the internet as the principal dissemination medium for data products. However, we took many of the paper products, mostly reports, and some volumes of tables with no design changes and put them online. Our table making ethic continued. We developed an online database known at the time as the American Fact Finder, where users could find tables and thus reduce the need for the expensive paper volumes. And we used this new internet technology primarily as a more efficient storage and dissemination vehicle, but did nothing to modify the visual products we produced. Next slide, please. So that's one of our biggest challenges, is we have to change the culture from making paper products that we simply put online to making products built specifically for our online audience. This is a major cultural shift for the Bureau, just as previous innovations and inventions were. Our product line needed to expand beyond research or news orientations to include a focus on public knowledge and education. Our new wide-ranging audience comes to us directly online instead of receiving interpretation of the data through newspapers or elsewhere. And we need to use technology and design options such as motions or user interaction to make our products look more appealing and current, but at the same time still convey credibility of the federal government. Next slide, please. So we are challenged with finding across the agency a unified definition of what is data visualization. On paper, we had tables and graphics, but now with disseminating on the internet, we are challenged to find these products again, as interactivity can improve both tables and data visualizations. There is overlap in both the design space and the production space of internet tables and data visualizations, and this has contributed to our confusion of definitions. Focusing on the user can help to resolve the confusion, as both provide information but for very different purposes. Tables, apps, and data tools give users the ability to drill down, access, and retrieve specific information that they are looking for. And these forms are text-heavy and require reading, at least of the numbers, to understand the data. Data visualization are quantitative analysis shown with shapes, size, position, color, and visual marks rather than text, and we see them rather than read them. This can be visual stories for providing our users a deeper understanding of a subject, or internal dashboards for making business decisions. They are visual cues to replace memory. They use visual cues to replace memory or mental calculations. Next slide, please. Perfect. So we had decades of experience, procedures, and well-defined roles for creating paper products for the small, unusually expert audiences who saw them. But now with the broader audience, we can see our products. We We can see our products via our audience who can see our products via their desktop or tablet or phone. And with the interactivity, we needed to develop new expertise. So the path we've taken has come with some bumps. For example, our push to give analysts access to interactive graphic software, such as Tableau, which we hope would lead them to thinking more about presenting data graphically, worked better than we'd hoped. Our staff enthusiastically jumped into the deep end by learning Tableau and other graphing software and started producing data visualizations. By doing so, they took on the roles of analyst, designer, and programmer all in one, without necessarily first having developed the expertise in those areas or understanding the Bureau's publication standards. To address this, we've begun some training programs, both in data science generally and specific software like Tableau. Building data visualization is a team effort of authors and experts with specific skill sets and reviewers who ensure that the final product reflects well on the agency's reputation. Next slide, please. This proliferation of data viz authorship also has generated pressure to speed along our development of publication standards and procedures for interactive visualizations. Every author seems to have their own version of what looks best. So we need to document our best practices, update existing standards, ensure a common look and feel, create review processes that reflect the interactive data visualizations, and update our dissemination strategies. Next slide, please. Our challenge is to develop expertise to tell a story with interactivity. That is how to take a complex reality, see it through an analytic eye, and express this vision with a user-centered design, all the while conveying the information accurately and correctly. For example, this interactive shown here shows a fairly complex data story with multiple interrelated dimensions of analysis. It begins by showing the pathway from college to work in the United States. The fundamental question is, where do college graduates work? And the focus here is on STEM, which is the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, which are shown in green. Using interactivity, we can add dimensions of analysis. Clicking on a drop-down list, users can select a specific data grouping to view. And to keep first and foremost the data up front, we use pop-ups to provide supplementary information, such as definitions and source statements. Next slide, please. Interactivity can let users drill down into the data for a more detailed view, as shown on the left, or allow users to look at the same data set with a different analytic focus, as shown on the right. These data are shown in small multiples, which convey details and comparisons with user selections to add or remove groups for comparisons. Next slide, please. Another challenge is showing data quality measures without cluttering the graphic display. As a statistical agency, we strive to be transparent about data quality. In cases like this, where the measures of uncertainty don't change the analysis, a pop-up window answers the challenge. It allows us to provide data quality measures on demand without reducing the quality of the visual. In cases where the margin of error change analytic understandings, the graphic design will include measures as a visual element. Next slide, please. Another challenge is reaching the broad and diverse audience. We have developed new strategies to notify the public of our new data products and encourage them to visit our website. For example, our America Counts page is basically a news feed of stories about our data, written for the general public, and often are reprinted by local news venues. We have an online library of interactive visualizations and even have direct marketing newsletters. Next slide. The technical environment surrounding data visualizations presents a challenge. The Census Bureau strives to protect its data and computer systems. To do this, we ensure there are no links from our external-facing visuals to data inside the firewall. We lock our data visualizations against nefarious user manipulation or altering of the intended view. And we have an approval process for all new software. Cross-platform integration is a challenge. For example, does part of the visual get cut off, or is the visual response too slow? And finally, we strive to keep current through updating software and producing evergreen visuals. These are just some of the challenges we have encountered in our efforts to produce excellent data visualizations. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Definitely there is no lack of challenges after hearing your talk. That's a nice list. For the public, please, if you have any questions, put them on the question and answer tool, and afterwards we will come back to your questions. Okay, so let's move on to the next guest. Most of you know him already, as he was a speaker of the last week conference. He's Vincent Finat-Duclos. He works for the OECD in Paris in the Public Affairs and Communication Directorate that focuses on the external communication of data. He's a project manager for OECD Better Life Index. He led the development of OECD COVID country tracker, among many other projects. Vincent graduated from Paris Dauphine in decision mathematics applied to social sciences. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I didn't prepare any slide for today, and I realized that most of the things I had to say have already been said in the previous presentation, actually, so that's good. So we were asked to reflect about the challenges that the increasing use of visualization of data imposes nowadays for national and international organizations. And so I was just going to share my thoughts about that. One of the key challenges we encounter is the accuracy of the data we're producing, ensuring that standards are respected and that the visualization makes sense. We realize that by multiplying the access to elaborate tools and to produce data visualization, it gets really complicated to monitor everything that is being produced and to set clear rules, because technology is evolving so fast, so quickly, that the minute you publish some standards, some set of guidelines, there's a new tool that needs new standards, new guidelines. So we have some issues controlling what is being produced and how it is being produced, because as Jennifer said it, everybody thinks that what they're producing is the best thing that can be done. Among the set of rules we're trying to define, there's the type of charts to use in which context, the language to be used around the data visualization, and like also really basic visual mistakes not to be made, such as starting a bar chart, not having a bar chart starting at 0, or summing things that shouldn't be summed up, such as GDP of per inhabitants of various countries, just to adapt to a fancy chart template. We've had a case lately at the OECD where like an author wanted to create a Sankey chart to display GDP per inhabitants, but like it ended up like summing GDP per inhabitants of various countries, which didn't make any sense visually, but it's true that the result was really pleasing. So defining best practice and standards is really complicated, and that's one of the big challenges we're facing today. One of the things we're also trying to improve on lately at the OECD, and I think that any organization is facing, is ensuring that your visualization is accessible for people with disabilities, like color blinding or color blinded people that don't see colors really well, people that have problems reading. You need to make sure that your text is big enough, the colors work for everybody, so that integrates more complexity into the database creation, and that's something that's really hard to process. As Jennifer said, it all comes back to building expertise with the people you work with internally and that produce database, making sure that they know all the rules and apply them in their regular work. One of the risks with creating with the spread of data visualization and like letting people act the way they want and not have a set of guidelines apply, is that the work of official statistic organization is reused by lots of media, lots of blogs, lots of newspaper, and the chart format are not often taken from the organization, but like adapted. So if you make a tiny mistake in the first chart, then like the mistake is replicated and sometimes enhanced in biomedia and something. And then even if the organization corrects the mistake, the initial mistakes, it's not corrected everywhere. So you have to be sure that the work you're publishing is good from the start. On the power and limitation of data visualizations, what I find is that as humans, we tend to like visual information a lot. And at the OECD, at least, we've tended to overuse it lately, in the sense that for every set of data, every piece of information we have, we try to create a data viz. A data viz or an infographic, and sometimes a paragraph of text, just a number, and associated with a picture would be enough. But we still tend to go to the fancy data visualization because that's a trend, and so that's something that's hard to change, but something we're working on. Also, the more things we published, the less sure it has an impact, in the sense that if we produce thousands of charts, we're not sure that any of these charts is really seen. Whereas like if we produce less charts, we can promote them more and make sure they encounter their audience. So that's something that's one of the power of data visualizations, in the sense that it's so tempting that you tend to overuse it. Another challenge and a limitation of data viz is that it's hard to know which concepts your audience is familiar with. What you could consider simple as a statistician is not always well understood. I had this case just this morning, playing with year-on-year data, like evolution of employment, and it was year-on-year figures, and we created a bar chart based on these figures, and basically there was a drop, a year-on-year drop, like for each period that was analyzed, but the drop was not as strong lately, and people will see that as an improvement, whereas like what you really were showing was like that, like the employment rate was really decreasing compared to the previous year. And so you always have to take your audience into consideration and make sure that the chart you're creating, you have to think about the person you're creating the chart for and the limitations they might have in their understanding of the concept. And the thought I had while thinking about this panel is, lately there's a lot of new technologies coming in, and you always want to use the latest one. It's a tempting thing, and sometimes you also have to take a step back and learn the technology a lot, see how it applies before using it. The one thing I read about a lot lately is data sonification, the use of sound to make people aware of data. And it sounds really interesting and could have lots of potential, especially in podcasts or things like that. But we first have to master the technology and the way to use it before like using it more broadly. So always take a step back in front of the technology before applying it too broadly. These were my thoughts for today.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let's move on to the next guest. Again, if someone from the public has a question, put it on the question and answer tool, and afterwards we come back to it. Okay, the third guest is Andrea Fernández from INEGI. She's a Deputy Director of Dissemination and Public Service of Information at INEGI. Prior to that, she worked in the private sector in projects related to data science. She holds a master in data science from ITAM, Mexico City. and she's a member of the organizing committee of this seminar about data visualization. Please go ahead, Andrea.
I don't know if you're listening to me.
Yes. Right
and
now.
do you see the presentation in a big form, or do you see the configuration for?
No, in a big format covering.
Okay, cool. Okay, so sorry for the technical difficulties. But I'm going to speak to only one challenge that I find is the most crucial for data visualization in the particular context of official information. Let's see if this works. Okay, so the problem starts with the diversity. There's diversity everywhere you look at when trying to create good visualizations for official information. There's diversity in data. For example, in INEGI, we have we have 154 information programs that range within the social and demographic arena, the economics, governance statistics, geography, environment. And we have different types of data sources, such as surveys, census, administrative registers, business registers, national accounts, prices, topography, geodesy, remote sensing, photogrammetry, cartography. That's quite a bit and quite different types of data that yield very different visualizations when taken alone. But if you combine them, the possibilities are almost endless. We also have a diversity in users. Here I put the example of INEGI's website and INEGI services. In INEGI's website during 2020, we had 13 million users, over 62 million visits, 7.2 million downloads, and we also have a chat service and a telephone service, and we had over 193,000 requests for information through those channels. But our users range in their purpose and in their field of specialization, which make for a range of statistical literacy. You have state officials, lawmakers, public policymakers, policy evaluators, information producers, international organizations, journalists, activists, analysts, business owners, researchers, teachers, students, and a lot of more users. You also have a diversity in channels. Right now, with technology, we have moved towards making information accessible through our websites. INEGI has a specific website, but it also has a website for kids. It also has an Instagram account, a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and that relates to what my colleague was saying about the way in which the information starts proliferating and moving through different channels, through social media, through newspaper articles, etc. So the challenge that is posed by diversity is that you have a lot of data, a lot of users, a lot of audiences, and that makes for thousands of combinations of purposes and contexts. And well, now let me switch topics and try to understand what makes a good data visualization. So for me, a good data visualization is based upon which user are you trying to reach and for what purpose. It's always, a good visualization always has both. Otherwise, it's just noise. So if you're an epidemiologist and you want to understand the variance in the coronavirus, this is a very useful visualization. For most of us, this doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Andrea, just to check, right now, are you moving through your slides? Because
yes, I am.
Still seeing your first slides.
Really? Oh my
yes.
God. Okay. Let me share everything. Now you seeing my screen move?
Yes. Now it's good.
Okay, so I lost everything. Okay. So this is a really good visualization for an epidemiologist that wants to understand the variants in the coronavirus. For most of us, this is just gibberish. This is a really good visualization if you're an analyst and you want to understand the contribution of your covariants to your models throughout time. And this is a great visualization if you're trying to teach a kid to understand data, and you can make them use their Smarties and try to answer the question of which Smartie color is the least common. And that is a really great visualization to try to improve their statistical literacy and understand data and understand data visualization in particular. So what is a challenge? A good visualization needs a defined user, a defined channel, a specific context, a specific purpose, and good data for the above. National statistical offices have multiple users, multiple channels, multiple contexts, multiple purposes, and a lot of good data for all of the above. So the challenge that I think it's one of the big ones is that it is impossible to satisfy all users' needs for their specific contexts, purposes, and mediums. And that is a challenge for providing great visualizations for our users. I think that we have to decide whether or not we are going to use visualizations as a one-size-fits-all and leave most of our users somewhat satisfied, or if we're going to select specific users, contexts, and purposes and provide great visualizations for this. And that is our main challenge because, for example, in INEGI, we're choosing a hybrid approach in which one-size-fits-all type of visualizations. We are using those for specific tools that make certain data types accessible. So we have a tool for indicators, and we are trying to make standards for all of indicators and how different indicators and their domains are shown. That doesn't allow for a lot of context, a lot of purposes. It's a one-size-fits-all strategy. On the other side of the spectrum, we have been selecting specific users, contexts, and purposes, and have tried to guide them and create stories that have purpose and that mix data sets that are particularly useful for a specific context. So, for example, we have a great a publication that uses all of the data in governance statistics and just tries to bring for policymakers a great overview of what's going on within Mexico and all of its regions. But you have to select those users, contexts, and purposes. And well, that's the challenge that I wanted to talk about today. I'm sorry for the technical problems. Let me.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks a lot. Again, if someone has a question on a comment, please put it on the question and answer tool at the bottom of your screen. So finally, let's move to the last speaker. It's Reinoud Stoel. He's the head of the methodology section at Statistics Netherlands. Prior to that, he worked at the Netherlands Forensic Institute as a team leader of a statistics group and at the University of Amsterdam. Reinoud holds a PhD in psychometrics. Please go ahead, Reinoud.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, my presentation may be a little bit different from the rest, but I'm very happy to hear that there are definitely cognitive elements in the presentations that I saw before, especially in the one by Andrea. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you. It's always nice to travel through Zoom around the world. So today I'll be joining you in Mexico. And wait, I have to move something. Well, okay, this is okay. Today, the nice title is The Brain, Your Best Friend and Your Worst Enemy. And there is a lot to tell about, but I don't have the time to do it all. Maybe there's another opportunity in the future to do that. But this is a call for more focus on the cognitive aspects of visualizations in official statistics. Well, this is part of what has been said already. I have a background in psychology, and I've worked in forensic science, where I focused on the interpretation of forensic evidence and on a discipline that we developed together with my colleague Ichil Dror from England, cognitive forensics. And that's applying knowledge from the cognitive science in forensic science. And you probably all wonder, why is the picture of Reinoud upside down? Well, this is related to the message that I want to bring along, because I'm going to flip it. And now you probably, can you see it? Prior to switching it, you probably thought the picture is upside down. But when I changed it, you suddenly see that it was not only upside down, but that my eyes and my mouth were flipped, were also upside down. And it's really amazing that you do not see that when the complete picture is upside down. And that's because your mind works in a certain way. There's no time to go into detail into this, but the message is that we could use the knowledge underlying this. We could apply in official statistics to improve the quality of our visualizations. Well, I started in 2019 at Statistics Netherlands. And in the beginning of that year, I saw a presentation by Professor Menno-Jan Kraak, and he showed us these visualizations. These are 4 visualizations of exactly the same statistics, gender inequality in a part of the world. And on the left figure, you see Africa dark red, where the gender inequality is high, and in Europe it's low. And it immediately gives you the impression, well, it's very bad in Africa. When you change the color scheme, certainly you get a completely different impression. When you switch to a different color, you get again a different impression. And when you switch that around, so the color scheme you use has a large effect on how a certain visualization is perceived by a person. And why is that? Well, very briefly, your brain is able to do incredible things, often without you being aware of it. Your brain is the basis of your expertise and intelligence. However, exactly those aspects that make your brain your biggest friend also make it your biggest enemy. And why is that? We often like to believe it, but the mind is not a camera. It is a machine with limited resources. And I like to think of it as it always tries to minimize the amount of cognitive energy it likes to spend. If it can take a shortcut, it will. It is active versus passive. It organizes the world, it makes assumptions, and it puts a structure on reality. So we do not see the world as it is. We actually see the world as our brain wants us to see it. And while this is the basis of intelligence and expertise, it also has all kinds of side effects. Now, my goal is to stress the importance of theoretical and empirical knowledge about the cognitive aspects of communicating official statistics, and to use this knowledge into our advantage. So instead of being a cognitive hazard, we use it in our advantage to improve the work we do. And this has already been implicitly brought by, for example, Kevin Hawley, and it was also part of what Jennifer told us already, the best practices for thematic maps. Actually, if you dive into it, there are cognitive principles guiding these best practices. And I think it would be great to make those explicit, and we can learn and even further improve the thematic maps. But it does not only hold for visualizations. Actually, also when we communicate normal statistics, like a percentage. You probably know Gert Gigerenzer, an amazing researcher who has done great research and written nice books. But for example, a percentage for us, it's normal. But for the general public, they may have different interpretations of the 40%. And for example, 40%, 0.4 or 4 out of 10 are in the eye of the public not always the same. And Gigerenzer showed that people understand natural frequencies, 4 out of 10, much better than other ways of presentation. And as a side note, and Jennifer also mentioned that, communicating uncertainty, if you choose for 4 out of 10 instead of 40%, there's a natural way to include uncertainty in your, or certainty in your message. Because 4 out of 10, 40 out of 100, 400 out of 1000, exactly 40%, but it gives you a different impression of the certainty you have. So it's all about the power of cognitive knowledge. Most people can just easily read this message. And that's exactly why it's so important to use this knowledge in official statistics. Well, I've given many presentations in forensic science, many examples to really let you experience how the brain works. There's no time for this now, but I just give you a sneak preview. Some question to ask and challenging answers. What do you want to communicate with a visualization? And that's very similar to the questions Andrea asks herself. Will it be understood in that way? Does existing knowledge from the cognitive sciences exist? Wait. Is there empirical evidence? Is more research necessary? And I think these are important questions. The answers may be challenging, but actually it all comes down to how do we know whether a visualization actually improves the quality of the message? And I think this opens the way to loads of research to be done and to improvements being made on the way that we communicate our work, how we communicate official statistics. And that was my contribution.
Okay, thanks a lot. So these were the 4 presentations. Thanks again. Before we start with questions from the audience, has anybody of the panel a comment on some of the presentations that were shown, or make a remark about one of the presentations?
I was really happy of seeing that there are cognitive elements underlying the work that many of us do. And when Jennifer showed us a slide with the skill sets needed and all different kind of persons, I think there was one person missing, and that's the cognitive scientist. That would be a great extension to the team.
You're absolutely correct, yes.
Okay, any other comments or question perhaps? Actually, I have a small, well, it's more like a comment. Almost all visualizations we saw in your presentations, it were visualizations using graphs. Actually, recently, I realized that there is a much harder problem. It's when you want to visualize tables. So not the Excel formats, but putting an additional design element to make it more attractive. but still keeping the information somehow at the level of a table. But that's much harder, because of course you have much less freedom to add elements and so on. But I saw some examples and I was really surprised, but not only because of the result, but also of the effort to get this kind of visualizations. I don't know, any one of you has experiences with visualizations at the level of tables?
Well, I think any table is a visualization in itself. So, but I think that this, yeah, there's much to be improved there indeed. When you look at visualizations, we mostly focus on figures and maybe even info videos. But indeed, thinking about the table and what message you want to bring along with that table, and maybe even whether the table is the most optimal way to present that information. That's a challenge, and I think you name it. But as far as I know, but I'm only 2.5 years working in official statistics, there is not much work on how we perceive tables, and whether the table that's the basis of many things we do is indeed also the right approach to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
At the OECD, we don't have any ideal way of presenting tables, but we had dedicated some thoughts about it, not in a deep way, but when we developed the interface data.oec.org, because we're sharing the data with a few chart type plus table, and honestly we couldn't. We tried a few options by adding little bars inside the table to give an idea of the value that was being displayed. We tried various type of pajama stripes. What I call pajama stripes is like one white row, one blue background row, one just to ease the reading. We tried a few things, but we didn't find anything that was fairly convincing, and we did. In the end, we resorted to the same thing as we're usually doing. We don't have any fancy way of displaying the table, so that was a bit of a failure in that regard, in the sense that after a lot of try to improve our tables, we ended up like with the basic tables we always produce. But that's something that's really interesting, and that would need maybe some more research, because indeed, like some people like the charts, but sometimes they also want just want the raw data with some few visual keys to read through them quickly.
Okay, thanks.
At INEGI, we have a few one-size-for-all tools for making tables, and people can just pick and choose and select different domains of the same variables and just put it in columns or rows and just mix and match. But I agree that it is kind of an open question, because we have that, and we also have specific tabulars composed for specific users. And the diversity there is just, it overwhelms. And it always speaks to context.
Okay. Good, thanks.
We also have some tools that are basically lookup tables, and we're trying to put a little bit more, bar charts in there so people can see as readily which one's the biggest without having to cognitively think about it a little bit more. But it doesn't, unless it's not as obvious as if when you do a sort and you've got top to bottom, then you can easily see who's at the top and who's at the bottom. So tables offer much, that people can see those numbers they're looking for in particular, but it's not as easily cognitively to take on as a graphic that goes with it. So we're trying to do some blending, but essentially it's mostly our users who are looking at a table are looking for a number,
Okay.
Now, an interesting question, I think, is we always try to make our message easy for the person that receives it. But is that always the optimal way? Maybe some cognitive energy is important in order for the person to understand the message to the full extent. So sometimes, yeah, I think that's something that's interesting also to take into account, whereas we should always make it easy for the consumer to understand the message. And if we do that, does that result in a better understanding of the message?
I think the pandemic has a lot to say about that, because being in mortal danger has made people just look for data in an unprecedented way. Like, we're always looking at, here in Mexico, there's a traffic light for whether or not you can do certain stuff. And you start looking for that data. You start looking for where is the outbreak, the latest outbreak, and you're trying to, I think that when you bring data into the user context in a natural way, it's when you have that cognitive thing that just explodes and makes meaning.
Yeah. Good.
With respect to that, I really like the data storytelling that Jennifer presented to us, and that is something that consumers like, that they can tell their own story with the data that we present. That's yeah, I like that, and it can help in understanding what we bring, the message that we bring along, or that they want to bring along.
Okay, good. Let's move to questions from the audience. One question is the following from Maria Gomez. Could you mention a few examples about how to bring data visualization tools to small teams within the organizations? Teams that might not be highly related to data analysis or to data gathering, and which would profit as well from internal dashboards. So it's about introducing data visualization tools to small teams with no previous examples or experience. Can someone comment on that?
I can comment on that. I think tools are irrelevant. I mean, they're empowering, but they're irrelevant in the end. It's what do you want to do? And if you want to try to make a strategy for your specific team, you have to think of your purpose, and you have to think of the capabilities of your team. So if you have statisticians, for example, statisticians speak naturally. They have certain concepts in mind, frameworks in mind. And if they do not have to do a lot of data wrangling, then you shouldn't try R or Python. You might try Tableau. If you have designers and you're going to use InDesign, they know how to use that. You're going to maybe include ArcGIS because it's really easy for them to just start to use them, or tools for making infographics. But it really depends on what's your purpose and what's your capabilities, and then choose a tool that is in between your purpose and your capabilities and your budget.
Okay. Perhaps a related question. All of you are team leaders, and I imagine it are mixed teams in the sense of people with a different backgrounds. So if you want to solve some visualization problem, on one hand, you have, let's say, the people from a classical statistics background, and I think a statistical graph is usually made thinking that it should be well studied and used many times. And on the other hand, you have the infographics approach, where you focus on one particular application and you make your graph for that application. Yes. And if we remember many of the challenges Reinoud was mentioning about using visualization, I can imagine that at one point in a team, you get diverging opinions about should we really use a visualization, or to what extent spend a lot of time for one specific visualization that might distract if it's not well done. So can you comment a little bit about that aspect? It's like perhaps a culture shock between people from different backgrounds with different views on visualization. And right now, actually, this is changing a lot.
At the OECD, we have a mandate that is to try to reach like the broadest audience possible. So like we don't speak only to statisticians and policy analysts, but we try to have a broader audience than that. So we have this approach that is not a top-down, but a layered approach, where we like provide easy to read statistics for the broader audience, and then by going deeper on the website or following links, you reach a higher complexity. And then in the end, it's the data exploration. So when discussing with statisticians and policy analysts about the best way to represent the data, they always have some ground where they're satisfied with, in a sense, because the deepest layer, where like it's data exploration and everything, they have all the information they really care, they're really concerned about, all the metadata, all the notes, all the little caveats in the data, and they can play with the data. But for a user that don't want to get too deep into the message and just want something easy to read, you have the first layer, where like you just have the top message, and a message that has been extracted by the policy analyst, but has been simplified for everyone to understand. That's the ideal approach. It doesn't always work that way, obviously, because sometimes our messages are still complex, but we try to go that way.
Okay.
We also are similar in that respect. Historically, we've done both data visualizations for a broader audience, and then specifically for statisticians or people who have more expert audiences. And we continue to do that. It's just with the proliferation of the internet and the website, we really try to open the doors of the data to a much broader audience who may not have the background or skill sets that more expert audiences have, but as we do have the different layers of, but we really we're trying to depend, and it really is, as Andrea said, it's your audience, is who you're really trying to reach. And so we do, these media type infographics, or what we call small form graphics that we produce. They're very colorful. I have an example of one of my pages. It's very colorful, very attention getting, and that we ship out. It can go to the media. It goes on social media and that kind of thing. So it answers the question. It's very pointed, and that's really. But then from there, you can get more analytic and more complex analysis that we would produce and take to conferences and have papers. And then, as I mentioned, we were trying to do more of the storytelling too, to try to take more a targeted topic and package it. So it's across the board, but all together, we always are statistical agencies. So we really do try to emphasize how good are these data.
Good. Let's move to the next question. It's from Ariel Juarez. Do you think that institutions should limit themselves in looking for innovative ways of data visualization because they are unofficial references? So it's about, do national statistics offices have all freedom, or should they put some limits on it because they are an official references?
I think, of course, we have to limit ourselves, but not innovating. Innovating is something that goes on behind the curtains all the time, every time. We try every tool out there. We try every approach. You see Reinoud, which has a discipline that it's almost like unthinkable to relate to official statistics, and he's making great progress in his organization because it's relevant. And we try to innovate all the time. The problem is that most of the things that we do in the research spectrum do not come out and cannot come out because we have this constraint where we have to try and strive to have people use data correctly. And that surname, it's everything. Because with visualizations, you can lie so much and so easily. That you have to be really, really careful on what you're going to put out, because in all probability, a lot of journalists, a lot of analysts, a lot of policymakers are just going to take a screenshot of whatever you put out there and put it in their, like make decisions based upon that. And that is a big challenge, particularly when you're trying to take something where there's no good practice already established amongst the experts in official statistics.
Thanks.
Yes, I don't think I have more to say. Like we always want to innovate and use the latest thing, but we just have to be careful about data quality and the standards we set. We don't want to disseminate anything wrong or that could be confusing for people. So innovating is really good, but in a careful way, and you always have to be sure that you're still the reference and you're not making any mistake.
You briefly mentioned something about a project based on sound. Did I understand that well? How do you make that? Because that really sounds very innovative, but also probably very controversial.
It's something I've heard a lot about. It's called data sonification, and like it's the idea of bringing sound to the data and attribute a sound to some data. So if you're reading GDP data, like when you have a GDP raise, the sound will get higher, and you have melody being built for like this. And Google has actually produced a tool to enter data and create sounds around your data. So it's something that is going up, and it has some virtue. Like for when I was speaking of people with disabilities, like if you succeed in producing some like an audio concept that displays your data properly, like that renders your data properly, then you could like reach people that can't see your data visualization. So, but as I've said, that's something I'd like to explore, but you have to be really careful because you don't want to as an official organization, you don't want to disseminate something that could be confusing or not understood. So I really think the concept has some virtue and is interesting, but so far I've just entered a set of data in the Google tool, and that's as far as I've gone. So I can't really go in much more detail than that, but I think that there's been thesis about it done in the US not so long ago. So that's something I'd like to look at.
Okay, thanks. Any comments on that? I suppose that it's also related to the question to what extent official national institutes or international institutes want to be a reference for data visualization, especially nowadays where Google and Facebook and all the big ones, for many people, they have much more impact as a leader to use their tools with all dangers that might be implied. No, it's okay. I have some other questions. Let me see. One question from Beatrice Cora. Do you think technology is limiting expressiveness? With technology, one is referring to software tools. So the bottleneck at the very end is technology. Someone can comment on that. I think some partial answers were already given.
Well, I think technology is not a bottleneck. I think current technology offers a lot, but the question is how we apply that technology. And indeed, like Andreas is stressing, what do you want to tell? Who do you want to reach? And what do you want to tell? And I think those aspects are a greater bottleneck than the technology, because there's a lot of technology, and indeed many big tech organizations, they developed great tools for visualizing all kinds of things, and you reach into virtual reality, stuff like that. So I think technology is not the issue here. It's the way you communicate it, what you want, who you want to reach, and what you're going to tell. That's I think the most difficult aspects of visualization currently.
Okay. I think it's a good moment to close this discussion. I don't know whether someone of you has some final remarks or comments. If not, I try to put together, you can't see it clearly. Okay. So it's always difficult to make a summary online. But we were asking about challenges of data visualization. I think these are some of the challenges the guests mentioned in their talks. So at the first talk of Jennifer, it was about a cultural shift from paper products. It was about common understanding. It was about developing expertise. The need of publication standards and procedures, challenges related to storytelling, challenges related to showing data quality, about reaching the public, and internet and software issues like how to get a safe environment, how to get updates, and so on and so on. Then Vincent, he mentioned first of all, well, the need of new tools and standards, and a need for best practices, the need of using visualization, but that are accessible for people with disabilities. He also mentioned the risk of overuse visual elements and the phenomenon of always running for the latest technology. Yes. Andrea, she was talking about diversity. And at the very end, the proposal to select always a specific user, a specific channel, a specific context, and a specific purpose. And finally, Reinoud, he talked about the need, there should be more attention to and research on the cognitive aspects of visualization. So I think this is a very broad overview of some of the challenges that were discussed today. If there was not a a pandemia, I would like to invite all of you at a coffee here at CIMAT in Guanajuato, but unfortunately it is not possible. So this is just a virtual invitation. Enjoy it, and we hope to see you probably at the beginning of September when we start with the second block of conferences.